Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and this is the last book of Madeleine L'Engle's Wrinkle in Time series that I ever read. This was, I think, the book that pretty much just made me say, okay, I'm done. And that's because this is the book where things get biblical. The religion is an ongoing theme in this series, despite my efforts to sort of duck around it. Not very good efforts, but nonetheless. But in this one, we first of all get a view of two members of the Murry family that we have heard almost nothing from up until this moment. It's not that Sandy, short for Alexander, and Dennis, spelled with a Y, have no presence in the books at all. It's just that their presence up until this point had been, well, they were the black sheep of the Murry family, and that they were the two normal ones. They were aggressively normal. In point of fact, in a lot of ways, Sandy and Dennis are the two who, they are well aware of how hard they have to work at being normal in order to get by in school. That, you see, unlike Meg, who just is incapable of compromising, and Charles Wallace, who doesn't entirely exist in reality, and the twins' parents, who don't have to deal with being in high school anymore, so, doesn't matter, the twins have to be in school, and they're capable of compromising, they're capable of playing sports and being normal and having quote-unquote normal interests, and so they don't have a very big presence. In the very first book, the first thing that you hear from them is the two of them telling Meg that you need to learn to dial it back, you need to learn to compromise. If you weren't so aggressive about all of these things, you wouldn't have nearly the trouble you do. And Meg has never been able to do that. And in the second book, when Charles Wallace is, getting beat up in school, the twins once again are sort of saying, it's that he's weird. He's really actively weird. And it's not that they think that their brother should be less himself, and it's not that they don't love their brother, it's just that they are extremely painfully aware of the work it takes for them for everybody to treat them like everybody else. Anyways, in the last book, which I believe takes place actually after this one, I'm not entirely certain of the order of events and time that occurs in these books, but this was the last one that I read, and I haven't double-checked order of publication, but I think this was published after. Anyways, Sandy and Dennis are 15 in this, 15, 16, and they're still in high school. Meg is now in college, and she's taking college courses where you have all of those, weird course titles and weird papers that you read and things that have weird, abstruse topics that, anyone who's outside of your particular area of concentration has no idea what you're talking about. The phrase arched corbel table is just Greek to everybody except people who are taking architecture courses. So, Sandy and Dennis come home from school, and they miss a note on the door of the lab saying, experiment in progress, please do not enter. And they go into the lab because their mother, despite the fact that she is doing lab work, also tends to cook dinner over her Bunsen burner. It's one of those little character Phillips that Madeleine L'Engle adds that sort of, the kinds of things that authors add to sort of spin out a character and make them that little bit more idiosyncratically real. But anyways, it means that the cocoa that they wanted to make some cocoa, the cocoa happens thus to be in the lab. And they go in there and they see their father has been doing something with a computer, and they type just some stuff into the computer kind of as a joke, because they know their father is working with tesseracts, that is the ability to transit across space and time instantaneously, and they decide, and it's the middle of winter, they're both tired of being cold, they're from, Minnesota or something, so they wind up typing in, some place that's warm, low humidity, not a lot of people, sparsely populated, they wrote in, because they had been talking about going to, Fiji or Baja, and Sandy was saying, well, we want to go to someplace like that, and Dennis is going, yeah, but there's so many people, I don't want to get stuck in a crowd. Anyways, so they type that in, and then they see the note on the door, and then the computer warps space and time around them, and they find themselves in the middle of the Canaanite desert, and get absorbed into the early stages of the story of Noah. So, it's an interesting story, because there's a certain building out of internal mythology, but the thing that makes this really interesting in its way is that it's much, much more openly Judeo-Christian. See, the other books, you're having talk about, at Tyre in this fateful hour, I call upon heaven and all its power, and these I place, with God's almighty help and grace between myself and the powers of darkness. You can't duck the religion on it, you can't duck the notion of, we are fighting evil in this way, and so on. But in this one, we are speaking of El, that is, Elohim, and the Lord God, and it's very, very present. You have Nephilim and Seraphim, they wind up involved in Noah's family. And the thing about this is there's a lot in there that is sort of very much about explorations of human nature and the corrupting influences of evil. And you know what? It's a very good fish out of water story. It's a very good Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court sort of quality to it. Yes, we're calling them isekais these days. I am less than happy about that, but, fine, an isekai story. The point is, it's an interesting thing watching Sandy and Dennis go through this, and it is a well put together story. The mythology, the world that Madeleine L'Engle creates that is a little bit biblical and a little bit speculative fiction and a little bit history and a lot, very, very little history. With, her usual Phillips of nods to science and the fact that Sandy and Dennis sort of have to speculate their way to get back home because, of course, their father's machine that sent them into the far distant past of Noah's Ark is not a thing that is present with them, and so they wind up having to use the so-called virtual unicorns because, unlike Gaudior in A Swiftly Tilting Planet, who is very clearly specifically present, the unicorns in many waters are, as Sandy puts it, virtual unicorns. They only exist as long as you believe in them. But what that means is if you fall asleep, if you lose concentration, they kind of just evaporate. And that the idea was to effectively ride the unicorns with the assistance of the seraphim to get them home. And it's an interesting sort of speculative fiction, because once again, this is very speculative because there's a lot in this that sort of rides the line between science and fantasy, and is speculative rather than, one thing or the other. And I haven't read any of the other books by Madeleine L'Engle that fall into this world. I'm given to understand that there's a significant number of them. So, if one reads them and enjoys them enough to keep going, then good for you. This one kind of... this dive into sort of really specifically open, clear religiosity kind of did it for me. The other complaint that I have about this is that Madeleine L'Engle sets up a love triangle between Noah's youngest daughter and Sandy and Dennis, and she resolves it by not resolving it. That she resolves it by the fact that since the only people who can go on the ark are Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and his 3 sons' wives, and nobody else, other than the animals, obviously, is that you have this love triangle set up, and Yalith basically gets taken unto heaven, alleluia, which is, it's fine. She's a perfectly nice girl who doesn't deserve to be drowned just because God has decided that he has some artificial desire to only send, these 8 people on his boat. And it does in its way resolve the love triangle, but I feel like her inability to choose in its way also kind of does short shrift to the statement that Sandy and Dennis are different people, because it's like, oh, I can't choose. You can't choose because apparently they're too much the same for you to choose, even though you continually say that they're different. But if they were genuinely different, you would probably be able to choose. Anyways. And, this is a book for kids, and I get that, but I still think that it kind of was cheaping out on that particular aspect. However, I do enjoy it. This book has some interesting dark moments in it. And dark in... This series has a lot of dark moments, a lot of genuinely scary bits, things where you're looking at something that really, really genuinely feels evil. I don't tend to read a lot of stuff that has blatant darkness, although that may just be my complete inability to make judgment calls about anything. But the moment when the Nephilim get together and are planning to basically kill Sandy and Dennis by, using some sort of ritual of unmaking thing, it's a really sort of... It's just this sort of creeping blackness that's really... Madeleine L'Engle is very, very good at that. She's very, very good at these sort of creeping senses of this is super wrong. And it's something that comes up again and again in this series, in these 4 books. Just things that are... They're openly wrong, they're obviously wrong, but there's this subtle undertone of that, yeah, I know it's bad, and it looks awful, and, this is blatantly and obviously wrong and bad, but that there's something worse underneath that. The sameness of the suburb planet, that the name of which is not coming to me right now from A Wrinkle in Time, the misbehaving Farandoli, the ongoing family battles of a swiftly tilting planet, and in this, the Nephilim, that there's the open wrongness, but there's that she does a wonderful sense of just this creeping undertone of something else that's even worse to it, which, it's kind of obvious from the religious stuff, but it's very, 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 very well done and very, very magnificently present. And I think that's everything, and that's all that I'm going to be talking about as regards Madeleine L'Engle. So if anybody listening to this has decided that they want to do more, well, you'll have to read it yourself, because that's not going to be a thing I do. Anyways, that's everything, and I will see you all next week.